Japan has two capitals. This is not an accident. It is not a compromise. It is the result of 1,000 years of history in which two cities each decided separately what Japan should be. And both were right. Kyoto was Japan's capital for over 1,000 years. Emperors lived there. The great temples were built there. The tea ceremony, the No theater, the art of the kimono, all of it grew in Kyoto soil. It is the most culturally dense city in the world. Tokyo is the largest city on Earth, 37 million people. It was built on a swamp. It has been destroyed by fire, by earthquake, by American bombs. It has rebuilt itself every time, faster and stranger than before. It is the most relentlessly modern city in the world. The bullet train connects them in 2 hours and 20 minutes. 2 hours and 20 minutes between 1,200 years of temples and one of the most technologically advanced cities ever built. The same country, the same people, completely different answers to the question of what a city should be. This is the story of both cities, of a country that built two capitals and refused to choose between them, of what it means to preserve everything and build everything simultaneously in the same archipelago by the same people. Japan is an island nation separated from the Asian continent by 100 miles of sea. That distance was everything. It was close enough to receive Chinese civilization, its writing system, its Buddhism, its administrative models. It was far enough to transform everything it received into something entirely Japanese. The Yamato Plain in central Honshu was where the Japanese state first cohered, not because anyone planned it, because the land was fertile, the rivers ran right, and the mountains provided defense. Civilizations happen where geography permits them. Buddhism arrived in Japan in 552 AD from Korea, carrying Chinese sutras and continental sophistication. Within a generation, it had transformed the Japanese court. The great temples built in the 7th century, Horyuji near Nara, its wooden pagoda still standing today, were the first buildings in Japan that announced a civilization's arrival. In 710, the Japanese court built its first proper capital at Nara. They modeled it directly on Chang'an, the Tang Dynasty capital of China, the greatest city in the world. The grid plan, the palace orientation, the Buddhist temple complex at the city's heart, all of it imported from the continent and transplanted to the Yamato Plain. The great Buddha of Nara, cast in bronze in 752 AD, was the largest bronze statue on Earth. The hall that contained it, still the world's largest wooden structure, announced that Japan had arrived. The emperor invited monks from China, Korea, and India to the consecration ceremony. Nara was making a statement about its place in the world. Nara had a problem. The Buddhist temples had become too powerful. The monks controlled too much land, too much wealth, too much of the court's decision-making. The emperor decided to move. If the temples owned the capital, the solution was to build a new capital without the temples. The site chosen for the new capital was north of Nara, in a basin formed by the Kamo River and surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. Chinese geomancy, feng shui, declared it perfect. The mountains provided protection, the river provided water, the flat land provided space. In 794, the emperor moved. The new capital was called Heian-kyō, the city of peace and tranquility. Heian-kyō was planned with the precision of a divine mandate. The great Suzaku Avenue ran straight as a sword from the imperial palace to the southern gate, 84 meters wide, half a kilometer long. The palace faced south toward the city, the mountains guarded from the north. It was a cosmological statement as much as a city. The imperial palace was a city within the city, a walled compound of 40 buildings connected by covered walkways, surrounded by 16-meter walls. Inside, the emperor lived according to a ritual calendar so elaborate that a single day might require a dozen different ceremonies. The palace was not where power was exercised. It was where power was performed. The Heian court was, for 4 centuries, the most refined culture on earth. The aristocrats composed poetry for every occasion. They ranked each other by the quality of their calligraphy and the subtlety of their color combinations. And in this world, a court lady wrote the world's first novel, The Tale of Genji, in Heian-kyō, around the year 1000 AD. The Tale of Genji is a 1,000-page novel about the inner life of a court prince, written by a woman named Murasaki Shikibu, who served as a lady-in-waiting to the empress. It was written in kana, the syllabic script that Japan had developed by adapting Chinese characters to its own language. It is, 1,000 years later, still considered one of the greatest works of world literature. The Buddhist temples that had been left behind at Nara did not stay left behind. New temples were built on the mountains surrounding the new capital, Enryaku-ji on Mount Hiei, Toji at the city's southern gate. The monks and the court were in permanent negotiation. Sometimes the monks sent armies of warrior monks down the mountain to press their political demands. The capital that had been built to escape the temples was surrounded by them. Heian-kyō was never the city it was designed to be. The western half of the perfect grid was abandoned within a generation, the land too swampy, the water supply inadequate. The real city grew in the eastern half, organic and unplanned. The great boulevard remained, but the city around it was already becoming something the planners had not intended. The court aristocrats of Heian-kyō did not fight. They could not fight. They had lost interest in the military arts that had originally built the Japanese state. Instead, they hired provincial warrior families, the samurai, to do their fighting for them. The samurai proved very good at war and very interested in power. In 1180, the Genpei War began, the decisive conflict between the Taira and Minamoto clans for control of Japan. The emperor and his court watched from Heian-kyō as the 2 most powerful samurai families fought across the country. In 1185, the Minamoto won. Japan's first samurai government was about to begin, and it would not be based in Kyoto. The victorious Minamoto leader did not move to Kyoto. He built his government in Kamakura, a military camp on the coast, far from the court. Japan now had 2 governments. The emperor and his court remained in Kyoto, performing their ceremonies, writing their poetry, maintaining the rituals of legitimacy. The shogun, the military ruler, governed from Kamakura. It was the beginning of an arrangement that would last in various forms for nearly 7 centuries. The next shogunate, the Ashikaga, moved its government back to Kyoto. The military rulers discovered, living beside the imperial court for 2 centuries, that cultural prestige was its own form of power. The Ashikaga built Kinkaku-ji, the Golden Pavilion, and patronized no theater and the tea ceremony. The samurai had conquered the court. The court had civilized the samurai. In 1467, the Onin War began in Kyoto. 2 factions of the shogunate fought through the city's streets for 11 years. The wooden capital, 1,200 years of accumulated culture in flammable cedar and cypress, burned almost completely. When the war ended, Kyoto was rubble. What the Heian court had built across 4 centuries had been destroyed in a decade. The Onin War triggered a century of civil war. The Sengoku Period, the Age of Warring States. Japan fragmented into dozens of independent domains controlled by competing warlords. The emperor remained in Kyoto, increasingly irrelevant, sometimes too poor to afford the traditional ceremonies. The city that had been the center of Japanese civilization was now the capital of a country that had no center. In 1543, Portuguese sailors arrived in Japan, the first Europeans. They brought firearms. Within a decade, Japanese warlords had reverse-engineered the matchlock musket and were producing them in vast quantities. The Sengoku period, already the most violent in Japanese history, now had gunpowder. The warlord who figured out how to use it best would unify the country. By the 1560s, a warlord from Owari province, brilliant, ruthless, utterly without sentiment about tradition, had begun the unification of Japan. He entered Kyoto in 1568, restored order, and began building the administrative infrastructure of a unified state. He was assassinated in 1582 before he could complete the work. His successor finished it. In 1600, at the Battle of Sekigahara, the final conflict of the Sengoku period was fought. 160,000 soldiers on a valley floor in central Japan. The battle lasted one day. The Eastern Coalition won. Their leader, a veteran general who had served the Great Unifier, became the de facto ruler of Japan. 3 years later, the emperor granted him the title of shogun. He moved his capital not to Kyoto, to a fishing village on the eastern coast called Edo. Edo in 1600 was a fishing village on a swampy bay. The land was flat, the soil poor, the rivers prone to flooding. There was no natural harbor, no mountain to defend, no ancient prestige. It had almost nothing that a capital city was supposed to have. The new shogun chose it anyway. He chose it because it was far from Kyoto, far from the emperor, far from the court, far from the accumulated power of the old order. The new shogun built the largest castle in the world at Edo. The stone walls of Edo Castle enclosed more area than Versailles. Every feudal lord in Japan was required to contribute to the construction, the deliberate bankrupting of potential rivals through forced labor. The castle was not just a residence, it was a demonstration of who had won. To prevent rebellion, the shogun required every feudal lord to spend alternate years in Edo, leaving their families behind as hostages when they returned to their domains. The processions of lords and their retinues traveling the Tokaido Highway created Japan's first major road culture. The financial burden of maintaining two households kept the lords too poor to make war. It was a brilliant system for maintaining peace. It also created a city unlike any other. By 1720, Edo had a population of over 1 million people, making it the largest city on earth, larger than London, larger than Paris, larger than Beijing. It had grown from a fishing village to the world's largest city in 120 years. The speed was extraordinary. The organization was more extraordinary still. Edo was a city of the townspeople, the chonin, the merchants and artisans who were officially at the bottom of the Confucian social hierarchy, but who created and controlled the city's extraordinary popular culture: kabuki theater, ukiyo-e woodblock prints, soba noodles, sumo. The culture of Edo was boisterous, inventive, and deeply contemptuous of the aristocratic refinement of Kyoto. The woodblock prints of Edo, ukiyo-e, pictures of the floating world, recorded the pleasures of the city, the kabuki stars, the sumo wrestlers, the courtesans of the licensed district, the great views of Mount Fuji. They were cheap, mass-produced, and thrown away. When they eventually reached Europe in the 19th century as wrapping paper around ceramics, they would transform Western art. Edo burned, repeatedly, catastrophically, completely. The Miraki Fire of 1657 killed 100,000 people and destroyed more than half the city. The Edo Carpenters Guild became the most important institution in the city because Edo would always need rebuilding. Fire was so routine that Edo residents called it Edo no Hana, the flowers of Edo. They rebuilt faster than before. Meanwhile, in Kyoto, the emperor continued to reign, which is to say, to perform the ceremonies that defined the Japanese state's relationship with heaven. The shogunate found the emperor's continued existence useful. Legitimacy flowed from the imperial household. The emperor gave it, the shogun used it. Neither city was quite what it appeared to be. In July 1853, 4 American steam warships sailed into Edo Bay. Japan had been closed to foreign ships for 250 years. The American commander carried a letter from the President of the United States demanding trade. The shogunate had never seen a steamship. The guns of the black ships could destroy Edo. Japan would open. The black ships split Japan. Some demanded that the foreigners be expelled. Joy, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. Others saw what the Western powers had done to China and concluded that the only way to avoid colonization was to modernize faster than the West could act. The debate tore apart the shogunate. Within 15 years, it was gone. In 1868, a coalition of reformist domains overthrew the Tokugawa shogunate. They restored power to the emperor, a 16-year-old who had never governed, and immediately used his name to carry out the most radical modernization in history. The emperor moved from Kyoto to Edo. The city was renamed Tokyo, Eastern Capital. For the first time in 1,000 years, there was only one capital. The Meiji government moved with extraordinary speed. In 1871, the old feudal domains were abolished. In 1873, the lunar calendar was replaced with the Gregorian. In 1872, the first railway opened. By 1889, Japan had a constitution. Within a single generation, Japan had become an industrial nation with a modern army, a modern navy, a modern bureaucracy, and a modern empire. Kyoto was not abandoned. It became something else, the repository of everything the Meiji reformers were replacing. The temples remained. The traditional crafts survived. The geisha districts continued. Kyoto became Japan's conscience, the city that remembered what Japan had been, while Tokyo became the city that was becoming what Japan would be. On September 1st, 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake struck Tokyo, magnitude 7.9. The initial earthquake was devastating. Then the fires started. The low wooden districts of Tokyo, home to most of the city's population, burned for 2 days. 140,000 people died. Tokyo rebuilt within a decade, larger than before. It always did. In March 1945, American B-29 bombers dropped incendiary bombs on Tokyo for 3 hours. The wooden city burned. 100,000 people died in a single night, more than Hiroshima. By the end of the war, 60% of Tokyo had been destroyed. The city that had burned and rebuilt from fires and earthquakes 100 times now faced the consequences of the empire it had built. Kyoto was not bombed. It had been on the target list. An American official, who had spent time in Kyoto before the war, argued successfully that destroying it would poison American-Japanese relations for generations. The temples and wooden districts that the Heian court had built were preserved not by the Japanese but by their enemies. Kyoto survived the war intact. It was the only major Japanese city that did. In September 1945, the American occupation of Japan began. Tokyo was a city of ash. The Imperial Palace and its grounds, which the bombers had deliberately spared, stood on a green island in a gray plain. The emperor who had presided over the empire that had started the war now broadcast on the radio in his first public speech, telling his people that the war had not gone in Japan's favor. He was the first emperor in Japanese history to speak on the radio. The Japanese people heard his voice for the first time. Japan rebuilt with the same intense focus it had applied to everything else. By 1955, the economy had recovered to pre-war levels. By 1964, Tokyo hosted the Olympic Games, the announcement to the world that Japan was back. The infrastructure built for the Olympics, the first Shinkansen bullet train, the expressway system, transformed Tokyo into a modern megacity in a decade. The 1964 Olympics were Japan's statement. The Shinkansen, the bullet train, opened its first line days before the Games began. The new expressways ran above the old canals of Edo. The Olympic Stadium was designed by a Japanese architect trained in the modernist tradition. Tokyo was demonstrating that it had mastered not just Western technology, but Western culture, and then exceeded it. In the 1980s, Tokyo was the richest city on Earth. Japanese companies were buying American landmarks. Japanese art was commanding record prices. The emperor's palace grounds were, at the height of the bubble economy, theoretically worth more than all the real estate in California. And then, in 1991, the bubble burst. Tokyo survived the economic collapse the way it survived everything else, by continuing. Kyoto became the counterweight to Tokyo's relentless modernity. The ancient temples, Kinkaku-ji, Fushimi Inari, Ryoan-ji with its rock garden, became the images the world used when it tried to picture Japan. While Tokyo built faster and taller, Kyoto preserved more carefully. The two cities settled into their complementary roles, Tokyo as Japan's future, Kyoto as Japan's past. Tokyo today has 37 million people in its greater metropolitan area. It has the world's busiest railway station. It has more Michelin-starred restaurants than any other city on Earth. It is hyper-modern, hyper-efficient, and profoundly itself, unlike any other megacity, because Tokyo has never tried to be any city but Tokyo. Kyoto today has 1.5 million people. It receives 50 million visitors a year. The temples are crowded. The narrow lanes of Higashiyama are so photographed they have become their own image, indistinguishable from the imagination of Japan that tourists arrive with. Kyoto has become the thing that it always was, but more so, more deliberately, more consciously, the city that preserves, still preserving. Every day, the bullet train connects the two cities, 2 hours and 20 minutes. In the morning, business travelers flow east toward Tokyo. In the afternoon, tourists flow west toward Kyoto. One country, two answers, one moving at the speed of the future, one moving at the pace of 1,200 years of practice. Kyoto has been adding torii gates to the Fushimi Inari path for centuries, each one donated by a merchant, a company, a family, in exchange for blessings. They crowd together up the mountain in their thousands. The oldest are weathered to the color of dried blood. The newest are brilliant orange, 1,000 years of donors climbing the same mountain. At Shibuya Crossing in Tokyo, every time the lights change, Several hundred people cross simultaneously from every direction. They never collide. In a city of 37 million people, they have somehow evolved the coordination to do this. Tokyo is always performing its own efficiency. The performance is completely sincere. The rock garden of Ryoanji in Kyoto was created around 1500. 15 stones arranged in raked white gravel. No one knows who made it or what it means. 500 years of scholars have argued about it. It remains perfectly unchanged, saying nothing and somehow everything. From the top of Tokyo Skytree, the city stretches to every horizon. At the center, surrounded by moats and green parkland, are the Imperial Palace grounds, the site of Edo Castle, where the shoguns who ruled Japan for 2.5 centuries kept the country closed to the world. The emperor lives there now. History has a sense of irony. Every spring, Japan stops to look at cherry blossoms. In Kyoto, the trees are older. In Tokyo, there are more of them. In both cities, millions of people sit under the same flowers that their grandparents sat under, and their grandparents' grandparents. The blossom lasts 2 weeks. The practice of stopping to see it has lasted more than 1,000 years. Between the two cities, visible from the train, is Mount Fuji. Both cities see it. Both cities have been painting and printing it for centuries. It belongs to neither of them. It has been there longer than either city. It will be there when both are gone. In the meantime, the two capitals continue their argument about what Japan should be. Mount Fuji does not participate in the argument. Two capitals, one country, 1,200 years of temples, and 37 million people, and the fastest train in the world, and the most perfectly raked garden, and the most precise crossing, and the blossom that falls before you can quite hold it. Japan. Every city we cover has a story that nobody taught you in school. If you want more, subscribe, hit the bell. You won't miss the next one. And if this video stayed with you, leave a like. It takes 1 second, and it means more than you think. The next city is already waiting.